defense.
Right, a significant chunk of change.
Exactly. And the question is, what gives you a stronger army? Training one elite F-16 pilot or buying a massive fleet of drones? Today, we're doing a deep dive into exactly that question. We're looking at a really profound shift in military strategy that's happening right now.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here, looking at our sources, is how they lay out such a clear contrast. It's not just about the numbers. Those are striking.
No, it's more than that.
It's the strategic implications, you know?
Yeah.
We'll connect this to the bigger picture of modern warfare, really help you understand why this shift matters so much for the future.
And our mission for you, the listener, is to give you that shortcut. You'll get the key facts, probably some aha moments, and a really clear picture of these new defense realities. So let's start with that cost comparison. That 25 million zloty figure, 6, maybe 7 million US dollars. That's the price tag for training just one F-16 pilot.
One. It's an immense investment, really, in a single person, preparing them for one of the most sophisticated and, expensive machines out there.
So let's use that as our baseline. What else could you buy, say, with traditional military drones?
Okay, well, if we look at that, the difference is already pretty stark. For that same $6 or $7 million, you could get hundreds of small tactical drones, things like the Switchblade. They cost maybe $10,000 to $50,000 each. So you're talking, 120 to 700 of them?
Well, okay, hundreds.
Or if you go bigger, like a medium drone, maybe a Bayraktar TB2, those are around $5 million each. So you'd get maybe one, possibly one and a bit.
Right, 1.5 maybe.
Then you've got your basic surveillance drones, maybe $100,000 to $500,000 each. You're looking at 12 to 70 systems for your budget.
Still quite a few compared to one pilot.
But then the really big ones, like an MQ-9 Reaper, they run $15, $20 million, so you're $7 million. Well, that doesn't even buy you one, maybe half of one.
Okay, so even sticking with the conventional drones, the ones we've known about for a while, there's already this fundamental trade-off, isn't there?
Absolutely. It's that huge investment in one highly skilled person versus multiple robotic systems.
Yeah.
Even dozens or hundreds.
It really sets up this tension, concentration of power versus distribution.
Precisely.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Based on the sources, what happens when you throw in the kind of drones developed out of sheer necessity, like we're seeing in Ukraine?
Yes. This is where the equation just completely flips. It's a new level of scale, a new level of affordability.
A real game changer.
I think so. Ukraine has, fundamentally revolutionized the cost-effectiveness side of things. With that same $6 to $7 million, forget one pilot, you could get thousands of drones.
Thousands.
Yeah, like first-person view drones, FPV attack drones, often adapted from commercial models,
Like the ones you can almost buy online.
Sort of, yeah, but adapted. They cost maybe around $2,000 each. So do the math. That's 3,000 to 3,500 FPV drones for the price of training that one pilot.
3,000 effective attack systems versus one pilot. That just changes battlefield math completely.
It's staggering. And it's not just FPVs.
Yeah.
Small tactical or kamikaze drones, depending on how they scale production, they could be anywhere from $1,000 to $5,000 each.
So potentially
1,400 to 7,000 units for that same budget. Even their medium-range strike drones, the Ukrainian ones, maybe around $270,000 each. You could field 23 to 64 of those.
Okay, so still dozens of quite capable systems.
Right. And then there are more advanced ones, like their Paleon-Itzia missile drone. Costs less than $1 million each, apparently, so you could get 6 or 7 of those.
And the scale. Ukraine's production numbers are wild. 1 million drones in 2024, planning 2.5 million next year.
The volume is it's incredible.
So this isn't just a numbers game anymore, is it? It feels like a qualitative shift. How can traditional military thinking even cope with this kind of distributed, almost disposable capability?
That's the $1 million question, or maybe the $7 million question here. Traditional military thinking, especially in the West, it often struggles with this. It's built around these high-value, bespoke, frankly irreplaceable assets.
Like the F-16.
Exactly, whereas Ukraine has demonstrated the sheer power of mass-produced, tradable, expendable systems.
It really does seem almost backward, doesn't it? To spend 25 million zloty training one pilot when you see these alternatives. Is that what you mean by backward thinking?
That's the concept, yeah. The backward approach is investing heavily in the human, the training, for these very complex, concentrated, irreplaceable assets. The focus is always, how do we make our few things better?
Right. More capable, stealthier.
But the Ukrainian innovation flips it. The same money buys thousands of effective combat drones. They're distributed, they're expendable, and crucially, the operator training.
Much faster.
Months. For FPV drones, we're talking months of training, not the years it takes for an F-16 pilot. So the question shifts from how do we make our few systems better to how do we make many cheap systems effective? It's a total paradigm shift.
You know, it reminds me of other tech disruptions, like taxis versus Uber. Lots of cheap, readily available rides versus fewer expensive, dedicated ones.
That's a great analogy.
Or even in military history. Think about battleships versus aircraft carriers in World War II. The big, expensive, centralized power eventually got overshadowed by the more flexible, distributed power.
Absolutely. And we can extend that. One source had this really interesting analogy. NATO as Windows, Ukraine as Linux or open source.
Okay, tell me more about that. NATO as Windows.
Think about it. Often seen as a bit bloated, maybe running on legacy architecture, centralized control, expensive licensing those multi-billion-dollar defense contracts.
Yeah.
Updates are incredibly slow, right? Takes years.
Definitely. Bureaucracy.
Yeah, lots of bureaucracy. Sometimes single points of failure, often a one-size-fits-all approach that doesn't quite fit anyone perfectly.
Okay, I see the parallels. And Ukraine as Linux.
Lean, modular, distributed development, rapid iteration. They change things constantly based on feedback. Often community-driven innovation, very fault-tolerant because it's distributed.
Or adaptable.
Highly adaptable. Local customization. Use the best tool for the specific job, not just the standard issue. The differences are just stark. NATO takes years to deploy. Ukraine adapts in weeks.
Billions versus thousands in costs sometimes.
Exactly. Following rigid specifications versus just solving the problem directly. Few expensive units versus many, many cheap ones. It's a fundamental difference in operating philosophy, really.
Right. So if this Ukrainian model, this sort of Linux approach, is so clearly effective on the battlefield, why aren't all militaries, especially NATO, just jumping on this immediately? It feels like there must be some serious resistance.
Oh, there is. Significant resistance, and it mostly boils down to something called stakeholder capture.
Stakeholder capture, meaning?
Meaning the people who benefit from the current system, the Windows model, have a very strong interest in keeping things the way they are. Think about the big defense contractors, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, BAE Systems.
Right, they like those massive long-term contracts.
Exactly. Multi-billion, multi-year contracts, guaranteed profits, vendor lock-ins, so you have to keep buying from them, decades of maintenance agreements. It's a very profitable model for them.
And it's not just the companies, is it?
No, absolutely not. You have political stakeholders, too. Politicians get lobbying money. These huge projects create jobs in their districts, which looks good.
Sure.
And then there's the whole revolving door thing, military brass or government officials retiring and moving into high-paying jobs in the defense industry. It creates this powerful incentive to, well, maintain the status quo.
And inside the military itself.
Within the bureaucracy, yeah. Generals often advance their careers by managing these huge, expensive programs. There's institutional prestige tied to having the latest, most expensive toys. And frankly, there's risk aversion. You know the saying.
Nobody ever got fired for buying Boeing. Or IBM back in the day.
Precisely. It's safer for careers to stick with the known expensive options.
So you've got this powerful convergence of interests, money, careers, sunk costs in existing platforms and training, all pushing back against this new, cheaper, distributed model.
Exactly. The Ukrainian approach directly threatens that whole ecosystem. Plus, you sometimes get the not invented here syndrome. If an idea comes from outside, especially from a smaller player or commercial tech, it gets dismissed.
It really shows how hard it is to change big institutions, doesn't it?
It's immense. It's like asking Microsoft to just, voluntarily switch everyone to Linux tomorrow. Their whole business model relies on the current system, even if it's sometimes inefficient. The established players will resist anything that messes with their influence or profit.
Okay, so given all this inertia, this resistance, you'd expect the established players, the big Western armies, to be the slow ones to adapt.
That would be the logical assumption, but...
One of the really fascinating, almost ironic points in our sources is that Russia seems to be adapting faster than NATO in some key areas.
Yes, it's a crucial observation, and it seems paradoxical.
Why? Why would Russia, often seen as having older tech or being more rigid, adapt faster here?
Well, it seems to be driven by necessity. Pure skin in the game, you might say. For instance, their Shahed drone production. They apparently went from maybe 300 a month to aiming for over 6,000 a month.
6,000, that's huge scaling.
It is. And it's not just numbers. They're innovating technically, too, like developing these fiber optic drones. They have a physical cable, maybe up to 10, 20 kilometers long.
Fiber optic, why?
To beat electronic warfare. Jamming doesn't work if there's a physical wire. It almost makes EW obsolete for those specific drones. That's rapid, clever adaptation to a battlefield problem.
So what's driving their speed then, if NATO's stuck?
It seems to be a few things. One, sanctions. Ironically, being cut off from Western tech forces them to innovate locally using what they have.
Huh. Necessity is the mother of invention.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
2, economic pressure. They need cheaper solutions because their economy is strained. 3, combat losses. They're getting immediate, brutal feedback from the battlefield. Systems either work or they don't, and people die if they don't.
No room for 10-year development cycles when you're losing tanks today.
Exactly. It's an existential threat for them in many ways, which cuts through bureaucratic luxury. And skin in the game generals know their careers, maybe even their lives, depend on these systems working now.
So it's a bizarre twist. The very factors meant to weaken Russia, sanctions, isolation, the cost of the war, might actually be accelerating their military innovation in this specific drone area.
It appears that way, yeah. Forcing them to become leaner, more adaptive, more like Ukraine in a sense.
While NATO's wealth, stability, and frankly its distance from the immediate fight, combined with that bureaucracy, might actually be slowing down its own adaptation.
That seems to be the irony the sources point towards. Stability can sometimes breed complacency.
Okay, so thinking about the future then,
Yeah.
what does all this mean? It's not just new weapons, is it? It feels like that whole arrow versus shield arms race is now on hyperdrive.
Oh, absolutely. The speed has fundamentally changed. The traditional cycle for developing a new weapon and then a countermeasure that used to take, 5 years, 10 years?
At least. Sometimes longer.
Now, we're seeing iterations in months, sometimes weeks. Software updates pushed overnight, 3D printing allowing rapid design changes for hardware.
Wow.
And there's that crucial cost asymmetry we talked about. Defense systems, interceptor missiles, jamming gear are still really expensive, often millions per shot or per system.
While the attack systems, the drones, are getting cheaper and cheaper.
Exactly. Thousands of dollars sometimes. So the offense can just overwhelm expensive defenses with sheer numbers. It economically favors the attacker right now.
And Ukraine seems to be riding that wave.
They are masters of it. Constant adaptation, pushing software updates constantly, rapidly developing countermeasures like those fiber optic cables to get around jamming. It's all about low-cost solutions. A $2,000 drone taking out a multi-million-dollar piece of equipment.
That kind of rapid evolution, it makes you wonder about robots and AI. Are they the next Wonder Waff, the miracle weapon that changes everything?
Ugh. The Wunderwaffe syndrome. It's a definite risk. You see it with AI and robotics, lots of overpromising, maybe some magical thinking. Technology fetishism, right? Focusing on the coolest tech rather than what's actually effective.
Like building a Terminator.
Yeah, exactly. Pouring billions into these complex, maybe unrealistic Terminator concepts while ignoring simpler solutions. But the real lesson from Ukraine seems to be the opposite.
Simple, cheap, numerous.
Exactly. Simple, cheap, numerous robots working together often beat one super robot. Human-machine teaming is key. Rapid iteration, adapting commercial tech that consistently seems to outperform trying to build these perfect, bespoke military systems from scratch.
So the smart approach isn't Skynet,
It's using robots as force multipliers for
Right.
practical things, first logistics, reconnaissance, demining, using swarm tactics where the power is in the network, not the individual unit, not relying on one magical super robot.
listening to all this, the adaptation, the speed, the different approaches, I keep coming back to another analogy. It almost sounds like Western armies are facing an evolutionary challenge, like Neanderthals versus Homo sapiens.
That's a powerful analogy.
Right.
And maybe quite apt, actually, if Western armies are the Neanderthals in this picture.
How so?
Well, think about it. Physically powerful, big, expensive, sophisticated weapons like F-35s, highly specialized tools, operating in established territories, using established doctrines, but maybe slower to adapt because of the bureaucracy, the long procurement cycle.
Resource intensive too, right? High maintenance, big
Yeah.
logistics tail.
Very resource intensive and operating with smaller populations, highly trained professional forces, but fewer in number compared to potential mass mobilization or mass drone deployment.
Okay, and the Homo sapiens in this analogy, that's Ukraine and maybe Russia in this adaptive mode.
You could argue that. More adaptable, clearly. using simpler, more versatile tools, cheap drones, adapted commercial tech, excelling at cooperation, maybe through swarm tactics and distributed networks.
Faster reproduction, too, in a way. Mass production of cheap systems.
Absolutely faster reproduction. And cultural innovation rapidly spreading new tactics and techniques through the force. They're more resource efficient, doing more with less.
So the risk for the Neanderthals, the Western armies, isn't necessarily that they're weaker in a direct comparison of single systems.
No, an F-35 is obviously vastly more capable than a cheap FPV drone one-on-one.
But the risk is they can't adapt fast enough to this new climate of warfare, this new environment dominated by speed, numbers, and adaptability.
That seems to be the core challenge. Survival in this evolutionary context means being flexible, collaborative, innovative, and fast, not just powerful.
So it sounds like the strategic imperative then is accepting this new paradigm. Quantity having a quality all its own, rapid iteration being key, distributed production, software driving capability.
That's the framework, yes. And it implies specific actions. Short term, like the next 2 to 5 years, you probably need a dual track approach. Keep the old systems running, but rapidly build the new capabilities alongside them. How?
Maybe set up dedicated Ukraine simulation centers inside NATO countries. Learn directly. Fast-track procurement for small, cheap systems. Partner heavily with commercial tech, DJI, Tesla, even gaming companies who understand networks and user interfaces.
And medium term, 5-10 years out.
That's where you start the gradual transition. Build up local production capacity for drones and sensors, so you're not reliant on complex global supply chains. Train a whole new generation of operators comfortable with swarm tactics and rapid software updates.
What about for smaller countries? Poland, the Baltics, they can't afford dual tracks easily.
They could actually leapfrog, maybe skip some of the expensive legacy Western systems entirely and become the test labs for these new distributed drone-centric approaches within NATO. Regional cooperation would be key there.
And the big players, the US, UK, France.
They probably need separate innovation tracks, maybe shielded from the main bureaucracy. Massive investment in these consumable, attritable systems, and critically accepting that some very expensive traditional platforms, well, they might just become obsolete faster than planned. So the key principles are speed over perfection, adaptability over rigid specifications.
Many cheap solutions over few expensive ones, and local production over fragile global supply chains. That seems to be the winning formula emerging.
Okay, but how? How can NATO, or really any large traditional military, actually make this kind of fundamental shift? We talked about stakeholder capture, the bureaucracy. It seems almost impossible.
It's incredibly difficult, no doubt, but not impossible. It requires a really radical, multi-pronged attack on the status quo.
Like what would that look like?
Well, first, maybe those Ukrainian labs we mentioned. Truly separate R&D centers in each country, maybe staffed by civilian tech entrepreneurs, gamers, people from outside the traditional defense world. Give them direct funding, bypass the usual procurement hoops, and tell them, reverse engineer and improve upon Ukrainian innovations fast.
Okay, separate the innovators. What else?
Leadership change. You have to fast-track younger officers, the ones who grew up digital and intuitively grasp distributed systems and networks. Make rotations through Ukrainian training programs mandatory for rising leaders. Maybe even bring in civilian tech execs for senior roles. Shake up the thinking at the COP.
Use competition.
Yes. Let the smaller, more agile countries, maybe the Baltics who feel the threat most acutely, lead the way. Create internal competition within NATO. Publish cost comparisons. Look, Poland got 10,000 drones for the price of training X pilots or buying Y tanks. Make the inefficiency visible.
Embarrassment as a motivator.
Sometimes it works. And emergency protocols give commanders wartime procurement authority for small, innovative systems now, even in peacetime. Mandate 90-day approval cycles for certain categories. Field test first, do the paperwork later. Treat it like the urgent shift it is.
What about the money? The budget's locked into old programs.
Economic shock therapy might be needed. Hard budget caps on traditional platforms, force mandatory cost per effect calculations for everything, and maybe mandate that, say, 20% of all procurement funding must be redirected to distributed, expendable systems within the next few years. Force the shift financially.
And culturally.
Cultural change tactics are vital, more exchange programs with the Ukrainian military at all levels, joint exercises focused specifically on these new tactics, a complete overhaul of war college curricula to teach distributed warfare, swarm logic, rapid adaptation.
It's a massive undertaking.
It is. And
Yeah.
realistically, history often shows that betting against institutional inertia is, well, often a losing bet. You tend to get gradual, grudging, partial adoption over decades. It's a huge uphill battle.
So the realistic outlook might be quite slow change.
That's often the case. However, there is maybe a sliver of optimism this time. The proof of the Ukrainian model is just so undeniable, so visible. You have younger leaders rising who get it. You have new tech companies eager to break into the defense market. And you have real budget pressures.
So maybe.
Maybe a change could happen faster than the pessimists expect, especially because many of these solutions are actually cheap to implement, at least initially. You can add drone capabilities without immediately having to replace the F-5 fleet. That makes the transition less threatening, perhaps.
Right. Well, this deep dive has definitely shown us that the future of warfare isn't just about bigger, shinier, more expensive weapons. It's really about adaptability, about speed, and about challenging these really foundational assumptions of traditional military thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And for you, the learner, it really highlights how external pressures, war, sanctions, necessity can force innovation in incredible ways, and how looking at a problem from a completely different angle can sometimes unlock revolutionary solutions.
And maybe if we connect this to the bigger picture, it raises a provocative question for all of us, right? Not just in defense, but in any field, any industry, even our own lives. Are we investing in the F-16 pilot of yesterday? You know, the big, complex, established way of doing things? Or are we daring enough to embrace the swarm of drones, the potentially disruptive, distributed, more adaptable approach that might just define tomorrow?
That is definitely a question worth pondering. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the future of military strategy. Keep learning, keep questioning,